Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Ream Library. I'm Tom Landy. I direct the Center for Religion, Ethics, and Culture, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here today. Today's lecture is the final lecture in the Deitchman Family Lectures on Religion and Modernity. This is a series that explores the place of religious and spiritual life in a world that's sometimes at odds with it, other times in search of it, and always at work reshaping it. We're grateful, too, to the Ream Family Fund for support today. I invite you to learn more about the Deitchman series and about all our talks by visiting our website at holycross.edu/crec, and you can sign up there to receive our emails or listen online to podcasts like today's talk, which will be up within a few days. Happy to welcome Professor Diana Hayes, a professor of systematic theology in the Department of Theology at Georgetown University. She teaches courses including Black liberation theology, womanist theology, American liberation theology, race, class, gender, and religion, religion and liberation. She's the author of 6 books, including Hagar's Daughters, Womanist Ways of Being in the World, and Still We Rise, An Introduction to Black Liberation Theology. Her most recent book is Standing in the Shoes My Mother Made, which lends its title to today's talk. Dr. Hayes is the first African-American woman to receive a Pontifical Doctor of Sacred Theology degree from the Catholic University of Louvain, and has also received 3 honorary doctorates. I've been privileged to know Dr. Hayes for many years and am really happy to welcome her today. So please join me in welcoming her.
It's wonderful to be here, and it's wonderful to be here in warm weather. I became the last because I was determined to come when it was warmer. Then a couple of weeks ago, I was at St. Scholastica College in Duluth, Minnesota. Any of you know Duluth or Minnesota? Let me tell you, it was not warm. It was something like 20 some odd degrees with a wind that blew right in off the lake, and just, you might as well have been stark naked standing there because it just went straight through you. But I'm honored to be here with you today, and I was very honored when Tom called and asked me to participate in this lecture series. What I'd like to talk to you about is basically my own journey, both in the Catholic faith and into becoming a womanist theologian. And I start, as I think all of us should start, with my mother. My mother was born in the Old South, long before the Civil Rights Movement, in a small town called St. Elmo, which is now a part of Chattanooga, Tennessee. She was the 5th child, the 4th daughter. She spent her formative years in the segregated world of Jim Crow. To be born black and female in the Old South was to be born into a life of struggle, hardship, and limitation. How did they survive, we wonder today? Her greatest shame was that she had to leave school at the age of 12 to work as a domestic to help her family. Despite that early introduction to a life of labor, my mother survived and somehow managed to find a joy in life that bore her up until she passed away much too soon at the age of 79, about 13 years ago, though it seems like yesterday. I often wonder at the loss of intellect and wisdom that was the result of the discrimination against and prejudice towards persons of African descent in the United States. A loss, a hemorrhage really, that continues even to the present day, as bright, intelligent women and men of African ancestry are denied the right to study, to pursue graduate education, and to work at meaningful jobs that they choose. My mother taught me to read when I was 3. She was one of the most intelligent human beings I've ever known. She was intelligent not because of any formal education, for as I noted, she had very little. Her intelligence was that of so many black women of her time, including her sisters. It was an intelligence grounded in a wisdom that came from deep within them, born of their experiences of being black and female in the rural South. From that well, my mother drew forth strength and spirit, enough to hold on to life's precious moments and to build a world and a worldview that nurtured and sustained, challenged and taught the young black women and men coming after her. Like many women unable because of their limited circumstances to live the lives they would choose for themselves, She prepared her daughters and countless others, again, male and female, for a future she knew nothing about. She and our other sheroes of faith somehow prepared us and provided us with whatever it was that we needed to survive. As the poet Jean Toomer noted, those named and nameless black women dreamed dreams and had visions of a world unlike that which they themselves lived in. Somehow they wove a tapestry of strength and protection and constructed shoes made for walking in unknown worlds. They constructed a support system made of equal parts love, strength, fearlessness, wonder, faith, and hope in the unseen and as yet unrealized future. Somehow, they knew what we needed to know to exist and persist in the new world of borning, even though they themselves would more than likely never see that world. After I wrote this, I was reminded of a poem that I had used in my book, Hagar's Daughters, and I just want to share this with you. This was written by Alice Walker, to whom all of us who name ourselves womanists owe our name and definition. She says, "They were women then, my mama's generation, husky of voice, stout of step, with fists as well as hands, how they battered down doors and ironed starched white shirts, how they led armies, head-rag generals across mined fields, booby-trapped kitchens to discover books, desks, a place for us, how they knew what we must know without knowing a page of it themselves." My mother, in many ways, trained me in that way. Small confession, when I was in 6th grade, I borrowed some books from the library. Somehow they never got returned to the library until my 1st grade teacher one day called and said, "Does Diana have these books?" My mother says, "Yes, she said you gave them to her." And she says, no, we just tell her to bring them back. And what my mother did is really what set the course of my life. Before she made me take them back, we went downtown to Ulbrook's bookstore, which is a store that was in Buffalo, New York at the time. And she got the name of each book, and she ordered each one and bought them for me. And then she said, "Now you have to take them back." My punishment was that I couldn't eat in the cafeteria, which was a great treat. We lived close enough to the school that you couldn't eat in the cafeteria every day. But so not being able to eat on the day I usually did was significant punishment. But more important was that I realized you can buy books. If anyone ever visits my house or my office, you will know I learned that lesson very well. I stand today in the shoes my mother made, wrapped from head to toe in that wondrous tapestry that she created that protects but also encourages me to challenge the status quo and keep moving on up a little higher. These shoes are strong, firm, and supportive. They have enabled me to stand tall on a foundation of faith in myself, my family, and my God, and to enter into worlds that historically were off limits to black women. I and my brothers and sisters in the black community owe our mothers, our grandmothers, our godmothers and other mothers, our play mothers and aunties, our foremothers stretching all the way back through centuries to Africa, a great debt as we attempt in our daily lives to live up to their dreams and our own. They stand a great cloud of witnesses, sending us forth, urging us forward, naming and claiming us as their own in whom they have great faith. I am a Catholic womanist theologian. When I make this claim, I do so based on several assumptions. First, that to be a womanist is to be black, that is, of African ancestry. Second, that to name myself Catholic is to call upon 2,000 years of African and African American history, claiming the Roman Catholic Church as black and African long before the existence of the English, Irish, Polish, Germans, or Italians as Catholic or even Catholic. Third, I lay claim to myself as a woman, equal in grace and beauty to those of European ancestry, black and beautiful, as the unnamed lover of King Solomon proclaims in her song. I make these claims in the face of centuries of denial of my womanhood, my femininity, my faith, and my race, both in the United States and its Christian churches. As a womanist, I am concerned about and committed to the survival of an entire people, male and female, rich and poor, gay, lesbian, straight, and differently abled, and of every race and ethnicity. I believe that my rights as an African American, as a black woman, are guaranteed only when the rights of all are guaranteed, that my liberty is restricted when that of another is restricted, that my human dignity, and thus my creation by God, is denied when that of others is trampled into the dirt for any reason. I believe that no one can be free until all are free. Part of my struggle is to name and affirm myself and my sisters as women of African descent who have been denied their rightful place in the history of humanity. We speak a new and challenging word, born out of centuries-long struggles to be free. Women created in the image and likeness of a loving God, as all women, and indeed all of humanity, have been created. Our words well forth from centuries of denigration and dehumanization, from the denial of our human persons, our female persons, and our right to control our own bodies, minds, and souls. We speak words of love, of passion, of anger, and of frustration. Words that cut but also heal. Words that challenge yet also affirm. Words that call for new ways of being and seeing in our communities and throughout the world. I am a Catholic, celibate, female, womanist theologian / attorney. An affirmative action dream come true. That dream, however, can quickly turn into a nightmare as I attempt to hurdle the obstacles laid before me and my brothers and sisters who have been schooled to be better than, but are too often interpreted as less than, those with whom we compete. As noted above, however, we did not come unprepared. To be an affirmative action baby, for me and many like myself, who insist upon self rather than othered definition, is to wear a black badge of courage that we use to pin up and hold tightly around us, that protective tapestry woven for us as a shield and goad so long ago. Sometimes when my energy is a little low, I'm feeling really put upon, I used to have a habit at Georgetown of putting on one of my favorite t-shirts and just walking around campus to see what reaction I would get. It's a black shirt with red and white lettering. The lettering is on a stop sign, really. And it simply says, danger, educated black woman. It gets nice reactions, I have to admit. It really lifts my spirits by the end of the day after I've worn that a while, just to see people do double takes and sort of wonder what the heck is going on. Standing in my mother's shoes has provided me with the courage to look back to where she and so many other black women paved the path I walk today. These shoes allow me to also look forward to a time when I shall pass them on to a daughter, not of my own womb, but certainly of my own convictions and faith. They are shoes meant for endless walking, for long-distance running, for standing patiently in hope and defiance. They lift me up to heights unexpected and carry me over the traps and snares that beset my path. They are womanist shoes, made by and for strong, centered, courageous, defiant, responsible, faith-filled black women who seek to have a positive impact on the world and people around them. They were my mother's shoes and her mother's before her, and now they are mine. I wear them with pride as well as awe at the faith and courage of my mother and foremothers who challenged me to dream my own dreams and make them come true through my own efforts, but never forgetful of those upon whose shoulders and whose shoes I now stand. I am indeed a womanist. Inspired by Alice Walker's defiant definition of a renewed understanding of black womanhood, I and many others like myself found in the term womanist a home where we could be comfortable and find peace and rest. My understanding of womanist is very simple and relates intimately to my own experiences of living as a black woman in the United States. I define it theologically for the first women to take Walker's powerful statement and use it for self-definition, were black women seeking to survive the masculine and patriarchal worlds of the seminary, divinity schools, and theologians. Thus, for me, a womanist is a female African-American Christian theologian. I use these terms deliberately, not to exclude other women of color or of other religious beliefs, nor to narrow or restrict Walker's definition, but simply to recognize the historical development of womanism. I honor Walker's definition, but have, like many other black women, moved beyond it. I believe that it is long past time that we of African ancestry in these United States and elsewhere in the African diaspora name and claim ourselves as the unique individuals we are without having to resort to placing color before a term that has already been defined and often over-defined. I do this while affirming at the same time solidarity with my feminist sisters of whatever race or ethnicity, recognizing that as women, we share a great deal in terms of the oppression of sexism and heterosexism, but that as women of African descent, we have experiences that are uniquely our own, oppressions that sadly our sisters of other races and ethnicities too often have participated in to our own detriment. Growing up in the 1950s and 60s, young women usually began mirroring their mothers at an early age, preparing themselves for love, marriage, and the inevitable baby carriage. I did not. I was different. As my mother and my sisters constantly told me, "You are different." I didn't take it as a compliment at the time, but I'm rather proud of it now. At the age of 10, I consciously rejected the idea of marriage, committing myself to a celibate lifestyle, which, however, I did not fully understand until I became a Roman Catholic. As the second of 4 girls born to loving parents, but whose father was also an abusive alcoholic, I was the one on whom the responsibilities of protecting and supporting my mother and sisters fell. That commitment is one I have kept to this day. But it pushed me, like my mother, into a life of responsibility at an early age. My way to escape was through books and education, access to which, as I said, my mother did not have, but which in the more integrated North, because for some strange reason, my parents moved from Tennessee to Buffalo, New York. We've been trying to figure that one out ever since. As my mother said, the first winter they did almost give up and leave. I'm surprised, I don't know why they stayed myself. And it's ironic though, because I swore we'd never live in the South, and now I live in Stone Mountain, Georgia, which used to be the home of the Ku Klux Klan. When I first found that out, I almost moved again, but somehow managed to survive. But as I said, my way to escape was through books and education. I was determined to find a better way by going to college and further, if possible. Or as my mother said, I was the Energizer Bunny of education because I just kept going and going and going, collecting degrees along the way. In Alice Walker's words, I was bold, daring, audacious, and outrageous, a woman long before I reached adulthood. In other words, like my mother before me, I was modeling what it means to be a woman without consciously knowing it. My first encounter with the term feminist or womanist until I returned to graduate school in 1980 to study theology, after having practiced law for a number of years. As an attorney, I was familiar with NOW and had supported the Equal Rights Amendment. I had begun to hear the term feminist, but did not feel particularly drawn to it. My response was the same as that of a group of black church women that Dolores Williams talked about, when she was trying to explain the term feminist and the feminist movement to them. They responded, "There isn't enough fabric in that dress to fit me." Somehow, I found myself at the age of 33 called into the Catholic Church. It's a move I'm still sort of puzzled about, still wonder about from day to day, but it's one that I've never regretted. After practicing law, as I said, for a number of years, I began to receive what I called a bugging sensation. Perhaps you've experienced it, where it seems like somebody was trying to catch your attention, and you couldn't figure out who because there was nobody there. And then certain coincidences, as I always put it, others call miracles or acts of God or whatever, began to take place. And before even the dust had settled on my baptism and confirmation in the church, I found myself at Catholic University, a school to which I had never applied, studying theology on a full scholarship, a scholarship for which I had never applied also. All of these things just sort of happened, and I can go into great detail, but then we'd be here forever. Leave it to say that by 1980, I was a first-year theology student in the pontifical program in theology at Catholic University of America, a program which 6 months earlier I had never even heard of, a university that 6 months earlier I had never even heard of, and did not realize when I applied for the pontifical program that I would be the first person of color and the first laywoman ever to be accepted into that program. God likes to have fun. It was at that time that I really began to be exposed to the feminist movement and what slowly began to become the womanist movement. Although I empathized deeply with feminists and their issues, I found myself disconnected, especially in response to the constant assertions that I must be a feminist as I was a woman studying theology. I tend to be a contrarian. I refuse to be stuffed into the boxes that others build for me. I dared to be different in whatever ways I could. And I especially was opposed to the beliefs of most of the seminarians who assumed that I was there to find a husband. As I told them, they were all a bit young for me. Not to mention there was no person of color in the school at the time besides me, so that was a little narrow choice, I felt. There were too many issues, however, in feminism especially, that did not affect me or my black sisters, who were at the same time trying to find our own unique voices. We wanted to speak a language created from our lives and experiences of humanity and God, not a language that others had written. Although I have had my differences, what woman hasn't, with my black brothers, we have been through too much altogether as persons of African descent for me to exclude them from my life. Additionally, the problem of overemphasizing the experiences and concerns of white middle-class women, often to the exclusion of women of color and working-class women, was still an issue for many of us. I find the work, especially of Dolores Williams, in her articles on womanist theology, but most importantly in her book, Sisters in the Wilderness, very important in this discussion. As the experiences of black women are often radically different from those of other women, so too must our language be different. As a critical aspect of her womanist theological methodology, Williams proclaims a commitment both to reason and to the validity of female imagery and metaphorical language in the construction of theological statements, calling for the creation of a theological language grounded in both imagery and reason, one which brings black women's history, culture, and religious experience into the interpretive circle of Christian theology, as well as into the liturgical life of the church. She reveals how womanist theological language must and can serve as an instrument for social and theological change in both church and society. She especially questions the language of surrogacy that has been so prevalent in Christian tradition, seeing it as a way of restricting the freedom of women especially, and black women in particular, both in the form of coerced surrogacy, which took place during slavery, when many black women were forced to bear children to their white masters, whether they wanted them to or not, were forced to bear children to black male slaves, whether they wanted to or not, were forced to care for others. I'm sure many of you heard of the stereotype of the mammy, for example, to care for others' children before they were allowed to care for themselves, as well as after the end of slavery, voluntary, allegedly, surrogacy that also caught them up in lives of serving for and working for others instead of being able to live their own lives. Her critique of Anselm, St. Anselm's doctrine of salvation via atonement is critical in today's world, where so many have-nots sacrifice years of their lives and health for the benefit of those who have and constantly want more. How do we move away from the masculine language of subservience and subordination to a liberating language of inclusive humanity? Just as Anselm and others used the language of the socio-political thought of their times to render Christian ideas and principles understandable, thought which took for granted a patriarchal worldview, womanist theologians today are empowered to do the same. And I quote Dolores Williams. She notes that the womanist theologian uses the socio-political thought and action of their African American women's world to show black women their salvation does not depend upon any form of surrogacy made sacred by traditional and orthodox understandings of Jesus' life and death. Rather, their salvation is assured by Jesus' life of resistance and by the survival strategies he used to help people survive the death of identity caused by their exchange of inherited cultural meanings for a new identity shaped by the gospel ethical worldview. This death of identity was also experienced by African women and men brought to America and enslaved. They too relied upon Jesus to help them to survive the forging of a new identity. Jesus' death, thus, was indeed liberative for all. His life and death brought renewed life for all, a new vision of life, one Williams sees as ministerial because it is a vision of life which seeks to right relations between body, which she defines as individual and community, mind of human and tradition, and spirit. This ministerial life is one available to all of humanity, male and female, because of Jesus' own life of relationship and community. As she puts it, Jesus came for life, to show humans a perfect vision of relationship that they had little knowledge of. Thus, as Christians, black women cannot forget the cross, but neither can they glorify it. To do so, she argues, is to glorify suffering and to render their exploitation sacred. As Williams and other womanist theologians acknowledge, for centuries, a life of surrogacy has been the experience of African American women. Womanist theology provides us with a foundation upon which to critique not only the masculinized, self-serving language of Christian theology, but its embodiment in the Christian churches of today, hopefully cleansing them of their sexism, racism, classism, and homophobia by again creating a language that speaks of life, hope, equality, and love. A language that builds rather than destroys, communities of affirmation. To do so, however, we must first come to grip with our own selves, recognizing who we are and how the women we are today have come into existence. Finding myself in a predominantly white religious institution, the Roman Catholic Church, after growing up in a historically black religious community, the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, was a shock, to put it mildly. Initially, although believing, as I still do, that God, for God's own reasons, called me into this church, I feared that the words of my youngest sister, when I first told her of my conversion, were true. You finally become white. Thank God, when I moved to Washington, D.C., I encountered Cradle, that is born into the faith, black Catholics, who could trace their Catholic heritage back over many generations because I didn't know any black Catholics when I became a black Catholic. The church I joined in Albany, New York was St. Patrick's, an Irish Catholic church. As I always tell my friends now, I said that was that Irish great-grandfather of mine who also was a colonel in the Confederate Army. So he has a lot to answer for when I see him in the future. But I began to learn a history that for the most part was unknown and untaught, not just to me, but to everyone in the church. That is the history of persons of African descent in Christianity. I was astounded to learn of the African origins of and influence on Christianity from its earliest beginnings, as well as the significant role that Africans played in preserving and passing on the Christian faith in North and East Africa. Like most Christians, I had assumed that African Americans became Christians only in the colonies in North America. It was exhilarating to learn not just of East and North African Christianity, but of the Christian and Catholic King Afonso of the Congo, whose son became the first indigenous Central African bishop. The role that Africans like St. Moses the Black played in establishing monasticism in the North African deserts was an additional revelation. It was less exhilarating, however, to learn of the role that Christianity as a whole, and the Catholic Church in particular, played in beginning and sustaining the African slave trade, as well as the institution of black slavery in the Americas. Learning this history, and at the same time encountering the liberation theology of James Cone, I began to explore black theology with an eye towards developing a black Catholic perspective. The early books of Cone, who's considered the father of black theology, were very, how should I put it, polemical. They were very angry. They were very negative towards whites, towards white Christianity, toward the white churches. And I kept saying to myself, but there has to be a way of creating a liberation theology that is of hope, that is of love. And I kept searching for ways to do that. I was excited about the prospect of developing a theology that brought forth the particular experiences, especially of Catholics of African descent, but became increasingly perplexed at the absence in black theology of the historical experience and voices of black women. It is at this point that I encountered the term womanist in Alice Walker's wonderful collection, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens. My entire world shifted, as did that of other women. I recognized in her definition a voice like my own, which spoke of my own particular experiences as a black woman. Her definition fit me. I can't begin to tell you how wonderful that felt. It described my experience. It described the journey I had been on for most of my life, one of naming and claiming myself as a black woman, boldly, proudly, and loudly. Thus, unlike many of my Protestant sisters, my encounter with both feminism and womanism, as well as with black theology, came at almost the same time as I was beginning my theological studies. As you can imagine, it was a little overwhelming at times, trying to figure all of this out. I found it necessary to make choices based not on intellect alone, but quite honestly on a gut reaction to what felt right, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. I had to learn to trust my instincts rather than depend on the assertions of others. I began to participate with those other womanists who were just beginning to emerge, Katie Cannon, Jacqueline Grant, and Dolores Williams, and meet other womanists at different conferences. Each of us who claims womanist as a critical aspect of our self-understanding does so from within the context of our own lives. But at the same time, it is important that we recognize the many shared experiences that have shaped us as black women as well. This is why it's important that you're aware of the context in which I live and which continues to shape my theologizing, the black community, but also the Roman Catholic Church. an historically predominantly white church that is slowly and rather unwillingly, if truth be told, being transformed into this century into a church of persons of color, African and African American, Caribbean, Asian, and Latino. As a Roman Catholic womanist theologian, I seek to explore the intersection of race, class, gender, sexuality, and religion in an effort to reveal the role which the Christian religion, especially my own faith, Catholicism, has played in affirming, exploiting, perpetuating, and upholding understandings of the different social constructs that exist in ways that have served to provide not only a language, but a pervasive hegemonic ethos of subordination and oppression of women and persons of color. Grounded in the Neoplatonic dualistic separation of the sacred and secular worlds, such an understanding has enabled the spread of a race-based, hierarchical, patriarchal system which supported the enslavement not just of other human beings, but of other Christians, the dehumanization of women and persons of color, and a stance which supports rather than challenges the oppression of far too many. The challenge today is to look at these social constructs, including religion itself, as it has come to be constituted, through eyes which have been opened by the recognition of the other createdness from which they emerged. Dualistic systems allow for the emergence of an either-or understanding of life, of knowledge, of morality, and of society. It enables the differentiation of beings into us and them, human and non-human, into those we recognize as friend and others by whom we feel threatened. It speaks a coldly sterile language of negativity, separation, subordination, and alienation. New words must be spoken that promote life, love, healing, holism, grace, community, relationship, and hope. In my work as a Catholic womanist theologian, I seek to remove the masks which cover up the inherent illegitimacy of the existing forms of society and their use of language to exclude and restrict. I do this by attempting to reveal other, more holistic worldviews which serve to bring about unity rather than division, harmony rather than discord. I have come to realize that in order to authenticate myself and legitimate the work that I do, I must also remove the masks which have covered the many worlds in which I find myself, in order to present them to public view and develop a unified challenge to them and to those worlds with which they appear to conflict. I use the words appear to conflict deliberately, for the reality is that they do not necessarily conflict, but are made to appear so by those who are in some way threatened by them. This means claiming the legitimacy of my being as a Black female professional and working to develop a critical understanding of both past and present in order to participate in building a more holistic future, one in which persons like myself will no longer be required to deny the totality of their being in order to belong, but can embrace and be embraced for what they bring to intellectual and personal discourse in both the public and private arenas. The Black presence in Christianity, especially in the Catholic Church, can be said to serve as a subversive memory. Any of you who know Johann Baptist Metz will understand that phrase. One that contradicts the assumed reality and presents a paradoxical perspective. Black women are a critical part of that memory, for without us, there would be no Black Christian or other communities today. We bring forth life, not solely from our wombs. We nurture it, we prepare it. We teach that life what it needs to know in order to survive and thrive, and then we set it free. As women of faith and courage, we must live our lives both publicly and privately in the same subversive manner that Jesus Christ led his. For our God is a God who takes sides, on the side of those most in need to bring them mighty from their thrones and exalt those of low degree, as Mary proclaims in her song. Our God is the God who preached good news to the poor and release to those in chains, whether physical or those of mind and spirit. To subvert means to turn reality upside down, to look at it in another light, to confound those who believe they are the only source of truth by presenting another, more far-reaching and earth-shattering truth. Sojourner Truth knew well the meaning of such a subversive faith, for she noted that if the first woman God ever made, Eve, was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, together women ought to be able to turn it right side up again. As women of faith, we must become extremists in love, as Martin Luther King Jr. urged, following in the footsteps of Jesus and the long line of saints and martyrs who followed after him, following also that long line of strong, proud, and loving black women who were able to run on for a long time. Only in so doing will we recapture the spirit of the early church, which, in King's words, was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and principles of popular opinion. It was rather a thermostat that transformed the mores of society. We must do so likewise. Drink deeply of the Word of God and set out to right the wrongs that have been inflicted upon so many in our nation and in our church for all of the wrong reasons. This is the stance taken by strong, courageous, angry, hope-filled African American women down through the ages who allowed no one to tell them who they were capable of being or becoming. We must continue to be the voices that speak when others fear to. As a people, as a nation within a nation, African American women were never meant to survive, but that has never stopped us before, and we cannot allow it to stop us now. It is long past time for black women to reclaim their voices, voices somehow silenced in a culture that depended on her heroism for its survival. That voice has been silenced because historically, as I've noted, women lacked the power as the disinherited to recognize and claim their own power. Today, womanists in and out of the church are making the claim that we have the right and the responsibility in today's world to name our own experience and the experiences of our people, whatever they may be. We have been nurtured and sustained by a spirituality which paved our way and softened the rough places just enough for us to continue. For as an African people, we recognize the importance of and maintained our ties with the spiritual. We must return to the strengths which reside deep within us and use them to challenge the status quo. We must once again walk out on faith and proclaim our hope by having the courage to release a cleansing anger which transforms not only ourselves, but our communities, our society, and even our world. In spiritual solidarity, womanists have the potential to create a community of faith that acts collectively to transform our world. When we heal the woundedness inside us, we make ourselves ready to enter more fully into community. We can experience the totality of life because we have become fully life-affirming. Like our ancestors, using our powers to the fullest, we share the secrets of healing and come to know sustained joy. We must take a stand against the principalities and powers of our day. It must be revolutionary. That is, going against the grain, against the complacency, against the status quo that fosters injustice. It must be nonviolent, and it must embody love. Black women, as their people's bearers of culture, have historically been the forgers of new ways of being and speaking in the world. They recognize with Collins that privatizing and hoarding ideas upholds inequality, but sharing ideas through translation and teaching supports democracy. It is our task today to speak life into the future, a future inclusive and representative of us all. We do so by working to redefine what it means to be male and female, in language that complements the actual experiences of those engaged in living out maleness and femaleness in ways inclusive of both heterosexual and homosexual understandings. In our stories, which is our history, our songs, which is our culture, our prayers, which encompass our spirituality, and our God talk, or theologizing, Black women speak life into being, not a stunted growth unable to flourish and condemned to premature death, nor one confined to dry, dusty tomes read and understood by only a privileged few, but a life that is fruitful and representative of a diversity created not by human hands, but by divine ones. Today, we who name ourselves womanist do so, not in opposition to others, for they must define themselves, but in creation, seeking to make community wherever we find ourselves. We define ourselves not over against, but in solidarity with, affirming that new ways of self-definition must emerge, not as hand-me-downs or cast-offs of others' self-understanding, but created out of the fabric of our own lives. In so doing, we are creating a new language of liberation that is open to any and all that are willing to speak plainly without assuming their language will give them power and authority over another. As womanists, our challenge is to gather the myriad threads of the richly diverse Black community and breathe it into renewed life, which can serve as a model for the entire world. A model that is centered on the co-createdness by God of us all, and thus the human dignity of us all, regardless of efforts to separate us. All who are oppressed share in solidarity with each other, a solidarity which should not be laid aside for individual desires or battles. The struggle is communal, not individual, and can be won only if experiences are shared, stories are told, songs are sung, histories are reclaimed and restored, a new language emerges which speaks words of peace and unity, which unites, which recalls both the pain and the joy of our different heritages and leads us into God's new day. Thank you. Thank you.